It's a high-tech conversation
and a low-tech topic.
live on the World Wide Web via Zoom. Bench Talk 101.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Bench Talk 101. This week we have Rusty Tchernis here to talk about bonsai. So I don't think Rusty needs much of an introduction. He's already done a talk for us before. So I'm going to hand over to Rusty as we go now.
Thank you. So I will do a little presentation at first and go through a bunch of pictures and kind of get us all on the same page. And then at the end, I have a couple of things I can show you if we have time, or there's questions that I have a few props to use to show it. So let me share my screen. There it is. Okay, so bonsai, the greenest woodworking. So woodworking and bonsai are two of my hobbies. I do think of bonsai as a type of woodworking. There's some similarities, there's some differences from the woodworking that we do. In this picture, you see me with, it's a needle juniper in a nursery in Japan where I study. It's a pretty big tree. I got to, when I travel to Japan, I try to come at certain times when the work is particular type of work. So for this trip, I came to specifically work on needle junipers. They have needles that are about an inch long, vary in sharpness. And when you're working on those, it will make you bleed. So this was the tree that one of the trees that I was assigned to cut. That was a pretty interesting experience. And you can see the size of that tree. It's probably about 4 feet tall. But let me start with definitions. Oops. Yeah. So first of all, what is bonsai? Bonsai just means a tree in a container. It's not a tree in the ground. It doesn't have to be any particular style. It doesn't have to be a particular shape. All that means is it's a tree in a container. Bonsai can be classified by species, deciduous versus conifers. It can be tropicals that need to be protected when the temperature is below 50 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of the bonsais that I have are not tropicals. Actually, all of them are not tropicals, but one. And so they can stay outside in the winter. When we think about species we work with, we think about the wood as well. So some things that we can do with conifers that have softwood, we cannot really do with deciduous trees that have hardwood. I'll show an example later of bending a pine that was about 3 inches thick. You can classify bonsais by sizes. When you go to main shows in Japan or in the United States, there's small, medium, and large sizes, small being up to 20 inches, up to 20 centimeters, 8 inches. Medium is somewhere around 40 to 50 centimeters, up to 2 feet tall. And full size is around 1 meter. There's a couple of sizes that are smaller than that. They're not usually shown in shows. And there's one size that I'll show, one tree of that size called the Imperial Size. And this is larger than 1 meter. And that's usually reserved specifically for the Imperial household and Imperial collection. And at the same time, there's names for any style of bonsais that are available. Mostly it kind of talks about the flow of the tree, how many trees you have. So this tree that we see in the picture here would be considered an informal upright, where the crown, the top of the tree is roughly above the roots. It's hard to tell exactly how old the art is. It came from China to Japan somewhere around in mentions of it in China go back centuries. In Japan, it's been an art that's been documented from about 13th century. This particular tree that you have in the picture here is the oldest bonsai I have ever seen. It was shown in the show in Kyoto. You can't read the sign, but the sign basically says that this tree is 500 years old. Now, when we talk about bonsai age, it's important to distinguish between two things. One, there's an age of a tree, and the other one is the age of the bonsai. So how long it's spent in the container itself. So this tree has been a bonsai for 500 years. In fact, it's been grafted 500 years ago. So it has 5 needle pine branches, white pine branches, grafted onto black pine or 2 needle pine rootstock or trunk, actually. So if you think about it, around the time that Columbus was discovering America, a Japanese man was cutting off branches from one tree and grafting it onto another. And I'll talk a little bit today about grafting techniques later on. Here's an example of a deciduous bonsai. This is a species or subspecies of a species that's used a lot in woodworking. This is the Japanese beech. The amazing thing about this tree is that it is not 500 years old. In fact, this is one of the very, very rare examples where the tree has been developed by a gentleman who also showed it in the show. So this tree is now probably closer to 40 years old. It was shown in the main show in Japan when it was only 35 years from being propagated as an air layer. So air layer is when you develop roots on an existing tree somewhere up on the trunk and then cut it off and it becomes a tree on its own. So it is very, very rare to see a tree come into maturity or being show worthy in one generation. This is one of those examples. When we talk about bonsai, the quality is usually presented through the age or perception of age. So in the pine, you would communicate age mostly through age of the bark, the thickness of the bark. On the deciduous tree, it's more communicated through the spread of the roots and the twigging, the many twigs ramification in this tree. Very interesting. So again, in bonsai, it's very important, the harmony, not of just branches and the tree, but when you think about perspective, making sure that the perspective is correct, making sure that the tree look harmonious, the leaves, if the tree is shown with leaves, the leaves are not too big for the trunk. If you're looking at this picture, it's really hard to tell what the size of it is, right? And that is because the proportions are perfect. What's interesting about this also is that the pot is equally young as the tree. So this is one, usually you'll see trees being shown in antique pots. This pot is pretty young, kind of emphasizing that the tree is pretty young as well, even though it looks like an ancient tree. Here's another example of a juniper. This is juniper owned by Shinji Suzuki. Again, a needle juniper. In junipers, the way you communicate age is this interplay between the dead wood and the live veins. The old junipers all over the world, the way they age is that most of the live tissue of the trunk dies off, and then you just have just a few veins pumping water and sugar up to the foliage. This is a fantastic juniper known as Taikan. Okay, this is the oldest tree that exists in the United States. This has been a bonsai since 1625. It survived Hiroshima bombing. It's known as the Yamaki pine. Again, white pine grafted onto black pine trunk. It's been given to the US in 1976 for the bicentennial as part of the 53 tree present from the Japanese government. And I got to water this tree. I never worked on it, but this is the oldest tree that I got to work on. Again, it's in the National Museum in Washington, D.C., National Bonsai Museum, part of the Arboretum. This is a red pine that was part of the Imperial collection. It was actually a tree that was right by the gate as you come into the Imperial Garden. And I got incredibly lucky that I got to work on this tree. I was coming to volunteer at the collection, and when I came in, they said, well, here's what we're doing today. We're actually going to repot this tree. So repotting is one of the basic tasks that you have to do with the tree. If you don't change the soil up, the roots will grow to the point that there's no gas exchange and the tree will just suffocate and die. So you can see now that you see this tree or me next to the tree, you can see how huge this tree is. So this is truly Imperial Size bonsai. Interesting enough, so this tree has been bonsai for, I believe, 225 years. 1795 is where the records go back to. The pot is actually older than the tree. And so we got to take the tree out of the pot, and so again, it came to US in 1976. The work we were doing was 2012, and some of the original soil was still in the middle of the root ball, completely broken down. The roots were not growing in it. The person to the left of me in the top picture is Jack Sustic, who used to be the curator of the museum in DC. If you're ever in DC, it's a wonderful, wonderful collection. It's in the National Arboretum, a little bit difficult to get to, but very, very interesting collection. Okay, so basic bonsai tasks. I'll start by propagating. The most common way of, if you get into bonsai, you probably will not be propagating your own trees. The easiest way is to buy an existing bonsai from someone else and try to improve it or maintain it. But trees can be started in different ways. So outside of collecting it from the nature, you can grow them from seed. You can grow them from a cutting. Basically, you cut off a piece of a branch and try to root that. Or you can grow it from an air layer. So we talked a little bit about this when I showed the beach. You basically strip the bark off on the part of the branch or a trunk and cover it in some kind of a soil medium or sphagnum moss and hope for the roots to develop and then cut it off. On a daily basis, the thing that you have to do is water and feed the tree. You don't have to feed the tree every day, but you water trees probably every day, sometimes multiple times a day. The nursery where I study in Japan, on hot days, trees are being watered 3 to 4 times a day. Styling, we'll talk a little bit about different ways of styling the tree. Probably not done every day. Maybe on my trees, I try to do one major styling task a year. It usually stresses the tree a lot, whether it's bending the branches down or cutting big branches and trying to grow new branches or bending the trunk or whatever the task might be. And transplanting is done, depending on the species, everywhere between 1 to 7 years. So if it's a deciduous tree that's really well developed, you might be repotting it every year, in part to slow the tree down, in part to make sure that there's space for the roots to grow. On conifers, conifers are usually repotted less often. I want to talk a little bit about connection between woodworking and bonsai, and I'll start. So there's a few terms on the left. I'll try to address all of them. The first one is tokonoma. Tokonoma stands for an alcove, a traditional alcove in a Japanese house, used for, sometimes you'll have an altar in it, sometimes you have some kind of display of ancestors. Bonsai often displayed in a tokonoma as well. As many things in Japan, tokonomas are divided by styles of different styles or levels of formality, known as shin, gyo, and so. So shin being the most formal, this tokonoma is the most formal style. And you can tell that by this beautiful carving at the very top. This vertical post will have exactly straight grain on all 4 sides. So this post will be exactly rifts on. And the horizontal beam at the bottom, just elevating the display tatami from the floor tatamis, it will be lacquered. Gyo, the middle level of formality, will have a round beam usually, but with the bark stripped off and not lacquered horizontal beam. And then so will have the most natural vertical post that will have bark on usually and rounded horizontal beam. But the quality of woodworking that goes into this is pretty spectacular. Stands, bonsais most of the time will be displayed on stands. And those stands, again, I have not gotten into making bonsai stands, mostly because the level of joinery required is pretty high. And I'm still not sure that I have the skills for it. The stand in this case is an antique Chinese stand. I can tell by the proportions of it. Chinese proportions are slightly different from Japanese proportions. Likely to be over 100 years old. Again, if we had more time, I can talk about joinery in those stands. Another thing that's very often kind of goes along with bonsai is kiribaki, which basically is a kiri boxes. So those are storage boxes, and I have an example here I can show you later. Kiri is Paulownia. It's very, very soft wood, very, very light, not very easy to work with, it crumbles very easily. But this is kind of the traditional Japanese version of storage box, and often stones and pots will be stored in those boxes. I'll show an example of suseiki. Suseiki stands for the Japanese art of stone appreciation. So stones are often accompany bonsai, and stones are often displayed in wooden bases called daisa. And those are carved perfectly to match the bottom of the stone. So the stone is very stable. Again, very, very high quality of work. I'll show an example of tools later as well. The tools are somewhat similar. The tools used in bonsai are somewhat similar to the tools used in Japanese woodworking as well. When we're thinking about work that's in bonsai versus woodworking, it's a little bit different because we think about trees versus lumber, right? Even though both of them kind of the same plant or come from the same plant, the work is quite different because we're working with a living organism and not with lumber. Another thing that's very different in bonsai from woodworking is the time horizon of a project. So when I work on a tree, depending on how refined it is when I obtain it, the horizon is somewhere between 5 to 30 years. So some of my projects, I don't expect the trees to be finished, whether it's a rough material that I just got a trunk and I need to graft all the branches and wait for them to grow. But at the end of the day, both woodworking and bonsai, it's still a collaboration with wood, right? We're trying to figure out what's specific about this, be it lumber or a tree, and where we want to take this. So in the pictures here, there's an example. This is a yew, again, a species that's used in woodworking as well. This was actually a hedge tree of somebody I knew that they dug it up and left it out on the lawn for months in the summer. And by the time I got it, the picture on the left is one of the first pictures I got from it. And about 12 years later, this is the right picture. It's the same tree rotated. And with a big difference in appearance, my friend owns it now. So this took about 12 years to get from left to the right picture. I'll talk a little bit about my journey in bonsai. So the way I got into bonsai is that my wife got a birthday present about 15 years ago, and that's the tree on the left. It came, a friend of hers bought it from 1-800-flowers.com. It's a bougainvillea. It's still alive 15 years later. This is the picture of it on the left. And I was just determined to not kill this tree and learn what does it actually take to keep the tree alive and what's involved. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. And eventually I got an opportunity to travel to Japan. I'll mention a bonsai blog at the end called Bonsai Tonight. The gentleman who writes the blog, Jonas Dupuy, visited this nursery. This nursery is called Aichien. And they allowed visitors to come in and stay up to 3 months and work in the nursery. So I've been going there now for 9 years. I've missed last year because of the pandemic and one time before that, but I try to spend about a week there a year. Aichien is one of the older nurseries in Japan. It was established in 1896. The older gentleman in the middle is the founder of this nursery. He was actually destined to inherit the family farm and decided at the age of 17, he decided to rebel against his destiny and planted 1,000 seeds of flower and apricot tree called ume. And one of those trees that grew from this batch of seeds is still at IGN. So we know exactly that it's 125 years old. The gentleman on the right on the top is Junichiro Tanaka. He's the owner of the nursery now. He's the 4th generation owner. And the last picture on the bottom here is Peter T, who was the first apprentice there from California. And he's the one who started this visiting apprentice program. So this is where I learned a lot of my bonsai. I'm very, very lucky to be allowed to come back and allowed to come and study there. I'll give a couple of examples of the connections between bonsai and woodworking. So on the left, this tiny plane, the small one on the bottom, was actually made from a bonsai branch, Stewardia. Was the first friend of mine was showing me that this was my first introduction to plane making. Still works, I still have it. And the other example I'll give called the Tanuki in Japanese. So I need to explain first what this is. So here on the right picture, you have a garden figure of a Tanuki. Tanuki is I believe in English it's called the raccoon dog. So it's similar to a raccoon, but a little bit different. It's actually an animal that lives in Japan. And in folklore, it's viewed as an imposter. So often Tanuki will pretend to be something else. And that's why this garden figure of Tanuki pretending to be a person. In bonsai, Tanuki means that it is usually will have an old trunk of one tree that's been dead, and then a live tree being attached to it, pretending to be an old tree. So this is an example of a Tanuki that I'm working on now. So on the left, it's a picture of a Japanese needle juniper that I had in my collection that unfortunately died. And this is the unfortunate side of bonsai, but has to be accepted because we're working with live trees. It's just part of the art that trees will die. They don't go forever. Some live very long time. Needle juniper, specifically in the US, I don't know exactly what it is, but they specifically in the US don't do very well. And I've heard so many stories of trees dying. Anyhow, this needle juniper on the left is also died, and I was determined not to throw it away. It has this beautiful, beautiful dead wood. Most of the trunk was dead already. It was an older tree. And so I kept the tree and then attached a different tree. So on the right is the picture now. Basically carved the channel and attached this new living tree, a young tree, into this channel. And so hopefully I will be able to, quote unquote, resurrect it, and it will look as spectacular as the old one did. And this is not exactly grafting, but this is similar to grafting. So I thought I'll talk about different types of grafting in bonsai. So this is one of them, known as side grafting. Basically, this is the most uncertain type, but also the most common type of grafting, where you cut off a small branch and you make a slot in a tree, and you try to match the living part of the branch, the cambium, to the cambium in the slot that you cut. And so you slide it in. Usually we'll either wrap it in some kind of a grafting film or put a plastic bag around it so the scion, that small piece that you cut off, does not dry off and but attaches to the living part. So this is most often done with junipers and pines, not very often done with deciduous. What's more often done with deciduous is known as approach graft. I actually do that with pines as well, where you just take a branch either from the same tree or from a different tree. You make a little slot in the tree itself, whether you cut it with a chisel or a saw, and then you attach this branch into this little slot. In this case, it's being held with nails, plastic tops. You can just use Thumbtacks or electric tape. And then as the branch grows, it attaches to the trunk. I have a couple of trees where I think I'm going to show an example here, where I've placed the vast majority of the branches this way. And then the last type of grafting is known as a thread graft, where you basically year or two to become really long, and you will drill a hole in the trunk and just thread this branch through the hole. And again, as it grows, it attaches to the trunk, and then you can cut it off. So here's an example of a Trident Maple that I've had, I don't know, maybe 8 years. And when I got it, it had only the branches on the top and one branch in the middle of the tree. And then on the right, you see the picture of it now. So it has maybe 7 or 8 branches. So all of them, other than the bottom one and the very top ones, all of them have been grafted through other approach to thread grafts. Here's another example of a type of work that often is done in bonsai as part of styling. So this is a Virginia pine that I collected. And on the left, you have the first picture I have from after I collected it and put it in the box. Pines, as we know, is softwood, and you're able to bend them. In fact, one of the things that the nursery where I study is known for is for techniques developed for making those big bends. So this tree is about, at the point where we're bending it, it's about 3 inches wide. So we made a little scaffolding here. There's a piece of rebar stuck in the pot vertically being attached and a piece of 2x4. And then we slowly were bending this. On the first session, I think we bent it about 30 degrees. We're using this plastic wrap around the trunk to make sure that as we bend the tree, the bark does not split off on the outside, and that part of the tree would die. Eventually, right now, the bend is about 90 degrees. It took a little bit more bending. And this is the last picture on the right. The branches will be placed in position by applying wire to them. And the wire is left until the branch is in that position for the rest of its life. Okay, so I think I'm almost out of time. So I'll say a few words. Robert, this is the part I was mentioning to you about earlier. Bonsai is one of those things that you can probably be doing for the rest of your life. But the thing, when I talk about the lifetime commitment of daily care for generations, this is kind of how people look at bonsai. You need to be taking care of your trees for a long time. And likely, if you're doing everything well, your trees will pass on to the next generation, either in your family or someone else's family. Interested in learning more about bonsai, I'm only given 2 sources. There's a ton of information on the web right now. Many more people go and study in Japan and then come back to whether it's US or Europe or South America, or Australia, and started their businesses there. So there's a lot of information available. The 2 websites that I'm mentioning here, Bonsai Tonight, is this blog that I've learned a lot from, and that's how I got to go to Japan, written by Jonas Dupuy. He puts about 2 new posts a week. So there's a ton of material there. It's really well explained. In fact, Jonas has written a book about bonsai as well. I strongly recommend this. PT Bonsai is the Peter T's bonsai website. He's the first apprentice at IGN and friend of mine, person who got me to Japan. So I feel like I need to mention him as well. And I will stop here and let you ask questions, and we'll take it from there. So I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Rusty, for a brilliant talk. I think that's given us a huge insight into bonsai, and hopefully through the questions you can give us a bit more of an insight into what appears to be similar to woodworking in bonsai as well. So we go over to the questions, and
I think Mitch was first.
Yes. So those who haven't joined before, if you want to ask a question, if you just pop your name in the chat, and you'll be asked to unmute, and I'll ask your question to Rusty. So, Mitch, sorry to stop your screen sharing, but you can screen share again and get.
Fantastic, thank you. Rusty, that was wonderful. I hope you can see my very basic attempt. And I was going to ask you, having not trimmed the roots at all since I started trimming the crown of this 10 years ago. Well, I trimmed the roots at the beginning, but not since. Should I be trimming them, and how much should I be taking off?
Excellent question. Let's start with the kind of a tree it is. I'm guessing this is a white pine, 5-needle pine?
I believe so. I inherited the tree, so I don't actually know specifically, but it is a pine, definitely.
Okay, and do you have other trees?
No other bonsai trees, no. Okay,
so I'm going to make a recommendation. So yes, it is in need of repotting. Bonsai is very, very species specific. So white pines would be treated very differently from black pines, for example, both in terms of soil you use, how much you water them, how much sun, well, sun exposure is probably similar. My recommendation would be, I'm going to make two. One is, if you are brave, you can do it yourself. I would say do it before the tree wakes up in the winter. So right after it stops freezing, but before the buds swell and new needles come out.
Right. And how much should I take away, do you think? About a third each time I do it?
It's really hard for me to tell you that without seeing the root ball.
Okay.
I would say take as little as possible. White pines can be tricky. Yeah.
So just give it a shot and keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, you know what? I'm happy to do it with you on the web, on Zoom, if you want to.
Cool.
There is, I can send you, I have a blog post about repotting. There's about 25 steps to it, starting from buying good soil. The soil I use comes from Japan. It's a volcanic clay that has really good properties. The easier thing is, depending where you are in England, I can try to find a professional not far from you, and I would recommend doing it with them. If you've had this tree for 10 years and you do something that I told you to do, and the tree, it'd be hard for me, and for you as well. So working with a professional is probably a good idea.
Okay.
I can find somebody in your area who would be able to help you.
Yeah, it's something I'd be quite interested in getting into. That's the only thing I've done. And I say it's 10 years old, it's survived so far.
That's, again, if you're able to keep a tree alive for 10 years, that shows that you have a certain level of proclivity for it. Yeah, I have about 70 trees. I try not to count them. It's a lot of work. I usually repot somewhere between 20 to 50 trees a year.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
Well, fantastic. Thanks again for your talk.
Sure.
Cheers, Mitch. Good to see that you've been working on some bonsai yourself as well. Over to you, Paul.
Hi, Rusty. Thanks for the talk.
Hey, Paul.
That was absolutely superb.
Thank you.
Do you find that you can transfer the actual patience from maintaining bonsai into your woodworking capabilities?
Well, I think your question presumes that I have patience.
If you're looking after that many trees and doing that,
yeah, I'm learning. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. It's, the skills are somewhat different. You know, sometimes there are similarities and sometimes there are differences between the two hobbies. There's definitely a transfer of some skills. Paul, I'm drawing a blank here. I'm not sure that I'm thinking about the patience. I think I'll give you one example that's definitely transferable from one to another. When I notice that I'm rushing, I've learned to take a step back, and I probably learned that from bonsai, and just stop and walk away. And whether I need to take a nap or I need to come back the next day, it's easier to do with woodworking than it is with bonsai. If I'm repotting a tree and the tree is bare rooted, and I'm not, I'm wiring the tree into the pot, and I'm noticing that the angle is off and I need to restart it, I can't come back a week later and do it. I have to do it within 20 minutes. Yeah. But
Sure.
I think, maybe one thing that I can tell you that I have learned is, and transfers from bonsai to woodworking, is self-compassion. Is not being as hard on myself, and trying to do better next time. And this notion of progress over perfection. And maybe that's a type of patience. I don't know.
I would say.
Yeah. It's a hard question. I'm gonna have to think more about it.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. Over to Chester.
Hey, Rusty, great talk. I think if you're patient enough, you'll find the answer to Paul's question. If when you came to visit, I don't know if you went to the Asheville, North Carolina Arboretum, but they were given a huge, very old collection of bonsais by a gentleman who had collected them all of his life. And he knew that he was not long for this world and donated it to the Arboretum. And some of his were incredible forestscapes with multiple trees and hills and different plants around them, depicting a whole scene as opposed to just a singular tree. And I'm wondering if you saw them, number one, and number two, if you didn't and you have seen those sort of forestscapes with more than one tree, how do you deal with replanting? You have to take it all apart and start again, how do you deal with those larger ones that have multiples?
Thank you. So I am familiar with the Asheville Arboretum. They actually have a show once a year at the Arboretum, and our club, Atlanta Club, participates usually. I know not a lot about forest. I don't have any forest myself, because bonsai is hard enough with one tree. I'm not ready to work with multiples. When it's the same species, eventually the forest planting becomes one tree. So all the roots connect, and when you take it out of the pot, they're all connected together. You don't have to reassemble it. I think what you're talking about is a little bit more, less of a bonsai, but more of a punjing, which is the Chinese version where bonsai came from. Chinese plantings often will have a landscape and maybe some figurines and multiple species. It's less common in Japanese. Again, I'm thinking that it all becomes one, or maybe not organism, but one planting, so you don't have to reassemble it. But again, this is not what I know enough about to say much about it.
Because some of them might have pines or oaks or cherries, and then in the foreground or within it, they'll have azaleas and rhododendron and other things that are placed in there, or miniature hostas, dwarf hostas and things like that to set the scene. But they seem very complex. They're quite beautiful. Some of them are 4 or 5 feet wide in the base. So
so Chinese version of bonsai, I shouldn't say version. The Chinese equivalent of bonsai, punjing, is quite different, both in styles and in sizes. Often you'll see pots that's very, very large, carved out of giant slab of marble. Again, I don't know enough about it to say something definitive.
That's all right. Well, great presentation though, Rust.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chester. Over to Andy Tuckwell.
Hi, Rusty. Thanks
Hey,
again
Andy.
for the talk. It's always a good result, I think, when you go into a talk and I know nothing about the subject. And now I'm interested in it and I'm thinking about things I've never wondered about before. And one of the things that I really don't understand, and perhaps you've learned in your training and so on, I mean, gross generalization, trees grow by adding a cone of wood onto the outside every year. And when you cut through, you can see the rings and count them, and that's how many years it's lived. Is there really the same thing going on with a tree that's only that tiny size, that's 200 years old? Has it got 200 paper thin layers of new growth in the same way?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, those are regular trees.
Yeah.
Some species are better adapted for bonsai, again, because of the proportions, but they grow exactly in the same way. In fact, I can, that bonsai plane, I can probably look and see how many growth rings, actually here you can see probably better, how many growth rings I have in there. And I'm knowing that, I know the gentleman who grew those trees from seed, they probably have 20, 25 growth rings in that plane.
Yeah.
So one of the oldest trees on Earth, species of trees, and lives in California. It's the bristlecone pine.
Right. Yeah.
They grow extremely slowly, and if you take a cross section, you'll see that those rings are very, very, very thin.
They're the ones that over 2,000 years old.
Yeah, I believe the oldest one they found that they don't tell anyone where it is in the grove. It's about 5,400 years plus.
Wow.
Yeah, it's actually not the oldest living organism on Earth, but it's the oldest tree. There's a tree in Japan that may be the same age, but recently they discovered it's not one tree, but multiple trees that grew together. So it's probably younger. Anyhow, yeah, no, but they grow exactly the same way. Yeah.
Very fascinating things, trees. There's always more to know.
Yeah, yeah.
Please don't cut down any more of yours to get wood samples.
No, so yeah, so I did not.
A rare thing to do.
Yeah, I did not cut the branch to make a plane. I cut the branch because it needed to come off for design, and then I decided to use that to make a whole plane.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Andy. Over to Matthias.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Rusty, again. A fascinating talk. And I very much join in with what Andy was saying just now. Yeah, of course, I knew that bonsai existed. I had a rough idea what kind of thing it was. But again, I don't think I will ever become a bonsaiist or whatever you like to call yourselves. But it's fascinating to get to know more about a subject that you were only vaguely aware of, and realize that it's yet another interesting, fascinating, beautiful rabbit hole that one could go down into if one run out of rabbit holes. So that was the observation. Actually, two questions. The first one is ties into with what you were saying about this being an intergenerational thing. So do you already have an idea what will happen to your bonsai in so many years' time?
Nope. I think I will live forever and will never die.
Okay, that solves the problem.
Yeah, no, so I'm pretty active in the bonsai club.
Mm-hmm.
We had, while I've been part of the bonsai club, we had at least 4 sales from people who were either getting out of bonsai or families of people who passed away.
Yeah.
Most of the time, if people think well through it, they will find a professional that will take care of this.
Yeah.
So I was lucky enough to work on a collection of Mr. Kito in Nagoya. Mr. Kito's collection was very famous. He was 92 when I was working on his trees, and he passed away 2 years ago. And there was a plan in place. There was a professional who actually comes to work in the US for a few months. And that year he didn't come because he had to take care of the collection. And there was a plan for it. Who's going to buy which trees for how much and so. It's very sad when there is no plan. And I've helped the family of a gentleman who passed away to sell trees. And yeah, it's better if there is a plan. It's much better. I know that if I get hit by a truck, there's plenty of people who will come and will take care of the trees and will sell them or find them new homes. So yeah, so doing it as part of the group is very, very important.
Yeah, I see.
Atlanta Bonsai Club is one of the oldest in the US, actually. It's been established in 1962. And that's the shirt that I'm wearing today.
I noticed that wearing the appropriate T-shirt.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah.
Then, so you showed us this bonsai plane, and which of course ties into a subject that I think interests many of us: tools. So, first of all, that bonsai plane, is it a bonsai plane because it's a plane made from a bonsai, or it's a plane to be used on a bonsai? And secondly, what tools do you have and do you use for bonsai? Show us.
Excellent question. So this plane, the hope is that I will use it to when I'm building my first guitar.
Yep.
And it will be the finger plane. So it's made out of a branch from one of my bonsais that it was Stewardia, which is a false magnolia. It's not used for bonsai, or at least I don't use planes for bonsai. One of the tools I was going to show is this. So we're all familiar with this tool, the Japanese marking knife.
Yeah.
This one made by Bo Zeffert in South Africa. Grafting knives are exactly the same. Yeah, it's actually the same tool.
Yes.
Here's another tool. This one is very special. This one is made by a company called Aritsugu, and it's been in the same family for 17 generations in Kyoto. This is actually, I use it as a grafting knife, but it's actually an umbrella knife designed to split bamboo to make umbrellas or purses. Here's another one of those. This is a left-handed grafting knife. So grafting knives I use not just for grafting, but anytime you trying to clean something to make a very smooth surface. So if you're cutting a big branch off, you will usually clean it up with a grafting knife and then put a cut paste on so that the water does not accumulate there and the wood doesn't rot, and then the callus grows over it. Yeah. I don't think I have other tools here. A lot of other tools will be types of cutters, scissors. There are a few. So when I was bending this big pine, we were using a jack. So something that can, bring two things together. And chisels, a lot of chisel work as well. Whether you're working on dead wood and you're carving that, or you're trying to clean out an area where you cut off a branch. Yeah.
Excellent.
But you know what? Maybe this is not about tools, but let me show an example. This is a display table known as a root stand. So this was all carved from one chunk of quince.
Blimey.
Yeah.
Lord lummy.
Yeah. This is, the quality of woodworking that you find when you go into a bonsai show is absolutely spectacular. And the other one, I mentioned Suseki. So this is a stone that I actually found in California. It's supposed to signify a little thatched roof house. The name in Japanese is kuzuishi, with a little snow on the top. So this stone I actually shipped to Japan for a gentleman to make this base for, and you can see it fits perfectly. In fact, if I shake the stone, it doesn't move almost. This was Koji Suzuki, who unfortunately passed away. I'll show you another one. This was made by a Japanese American artist. This looks like a distant mountain with snow on the top. And he made this dies at the stand to kind of hug. This was Mas Nakajima was making those. This is his style specifically. And again, it fits perfectly the stone. Yeah.
Good grief.
Yeah.
As in, that is extremely admirable and a level of skill I think few of us will ever attain. Good grief.
I've met Mas once. He unfortunately passed away now. And you know, we talked about how he does it, and he builds models and then tries to copy this model and model of the base first out of clay, and then tries to copy it into wood. And sometimes some of his bases for bigger stones sometimes would go over the stone, and he would add wood and match the grain and then carve into it. His work was unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh dear.
Sorry, there was a question about what's the name of the stone art. Suiseki. Suiseki. The Japanese name. I don't know the Chinese name, I'm sorry. Again, there's slight variation between the two.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Rusty, both for your talk and,
Sure.
and for your answers to the questions.
Thank you.
Thanks, Matthias. Ian Lambert.
Hi. Hello, Rusty.
Hey, Ian.
Really enjoyed the talk. I've never been to Japan, but it's a place that's always fascinated me. Something about aces, really. We've grown aces ourselves over the years, not as bonsai, but as small specimens. And we've managed to kill 5 so far in different locations and at different times, and we don't know why. So I was wondering if you'd had experience with aces at a bonsai level. And I guess what I'm really interested in is something just a bit bigger, but not necessarily with that bonsai base, but in a bigger sort of container. So it's something around aces. Why do I kill aces? And is there any? And the other fascinating thing you mentioned about, are you importing this volcanic clay from Japan? I was fascinated by that thought as well.
Yeah, the craziness goes deep. So let me start by asking you, what is aces?
Right. Well, I think of it as a Japanese maple.
Okay, ace. Okay.
Yeah.
Japanese maples, and why you kill them? It would be really to answer that. It depends on the type of the tree. So some of the whether it's Acer palmatum or Acer borgeranium, they will need different amounts of water and sun. So the Trident Maple, the borgeranium, will take much more sun than palmatums.
Right.
The Japanese maples, we're talking about 5 lobes or more, right?
Yes.
The leaves, yeah. Okay, so Japanese maple. Those usually do better in the shade.
Right. Is wind a bigger problem than sun, or because quite a lot of ours, you know, would get what looked like burnt leaves to go brown, and I didn't know if that was to do with.
That's probably because they get too much sun. I would keep them in the shade. Wind is usually a problem only when it freezes.
All right.
If it's not a frost, or do you live on the coast?
No.
So Japanese maples can be tricky. So there was a story going around, I don't know how true that is, about somebody in Texas trying to grow Japanese maples, and they had to keep them in the fridge over the winter because they really need to go dormant. Again, I don't know if that's true or not. It's a good enough story either way.
Right.
So in your area, if it freezes in the winter, it should be fine.
Yeah, we get frost.
Another thing is that when you grow in trees in a container, because trees in a container cannot grow a taproot, you have to wire them into the pot. so that they don't move.
Right.
If the tree moves, it will not grow roots.
Right.
So the tree needs to be wired into the pot.
Right. Okay. That's something I've never heard of before. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, and again, if the tree is moving, and then wind definitely becomes a problem.
Right. Yeah.
And then you asked about bonsai soil. So you can grow trees in regular potting soil. It's a little bit more difficult to control the amount of water you will give a tree because it's harder to tell how wet it stays at the bottom of the pot. The soil we use is kind of the ideal soil that we import from Japan. People will get a container. In fact, it's Jonas Dupuy, the guy who writes the Bonsai Tonight blog. He would buy a container and then different places in the US will buy from him.
Right.
And he'll ship a few pallets here. The good thing about akadama, the volcanic clay, is that it has a wonderful ionic charge and it just absorbs water and nutrients and then can slowly release it into roots. In fact, it's so good that if I don't wear gloves when I repot trees, then my cuticles will start bleeding that day. My hands go completely dry and start cracking. And then often we will have a lot of, so we try to use just inorganic components that will not fall apart and will not create rot in the roots. So pumice and akadama are the two components that we use a lot.
So
again, it's hard to give advice.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, the other thought is that to give up on Japanese maples and maybe go for a conifer, which I can keep small, but not necessarily bonsai'd. So maybe in a bigger container outside, you know, let it grow a meter or so. I mean, is there one that you'd recommend to look for the conifer range?
Black pines, so two needle pines, very strong. They're very susceptible to fungus, so you're gonna have to figure out how to control fungus. I have to, in Atlanta, it's very humid, so I have to spray during the summer, maybe every 2 weeks, different types of fungicide.
Yeah.
You know, the nursery where I study is known for black pines and Japanese maples, mostly Trident.
Right.
And this is, my collection resembles that, and the climate resembles that as well. So I have a lot of maples and a lot of pines. Yeah, you know, just, and if you're not sure, you can try to just grow it not in the pot, but in the ground first.
Right.
Trees will get much stronger in the ground.
Right.
Often bonsai developed in the ground first and then moved to.
Right. Great. Thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Ian. Rusty, I've got two questions for you. Firstly, a question on species for bonsai. Can you almost take any conifer or deciduous tree and turn it into a bonsai tree? Or do you have to be a lot more selective with species than that?
My first thought is you can do anything. Any species can be grown in a container. With that said, I don't have experience with every species, so I can't tell. Maybe some species really don't do well with root pruning. So I'll give you an example. So rosemary does not do well with root pruning. It's very difficult to transplant rosemary. With that said, I have seen rosemary bonsai in Japan. So that makes me think that almost anything can be used as bonsai. It might not be suited for bonsai because proportions. So sugar maple, for example, it's difficult to make a beautiful bonsai because leaves are so big. And so they're going to be completely out of proportion unless you're able to grow a bonsai with the trunk that's 2 feet wide. Yeah. There's a lot of ponderosa pine bonsai in the United States. I personally don't like them because needles are very long. But other than that, yes, I think any species can be used as bonsai in my experience. What was the second question?
Grafting. I think I think I gave you a bit of warning about questions around grafting coming up. Can you graft different species with each other?
So I gave you an example of white pine branches grafted onto black pine trunk. That's very common.
Yeah, but say with deciduous trees, grafting maple and an oak together or something.
So I don't know that. I have grafted different types of Trident Maple. So I have a tree where I replaced all the foliage. So I slowly replaced the original foliage that was very, very coarse leaf Trident Maple with a finer leaf Trident Maple. So that I know that's possible. The question is, why would you want to do that?
Just totally curious, throwing a curveball in there.
So I mentioned Kito-san before, Mr. Kito, who passed away recently. So Mr. Kito would never allow any grafted trees in his collection. And some junipers will have very coarse foliage, and often people would say, well, just graft a nicer foliage to it. And that's done. It's a personal preference. Whether you can graft maple onto oak or oak onto maple, I don't know.
Okay.
I can tell you what I do know. So within species, you can do that.
And where would you normally source the grafts? I guess you mentioned some of them from the plant itself, but then would you select another bonsai tree, or could it be anything growing in the garden or something you find anywhere really?
So I don't know how much time we have, but I can tell you a wonderful story about a white pine that was found in the wild in Japan by an owner of a nursery where my teacher studied. And it had very interesting quality. It had very small needles. And from this one tree, all the Zusho pines were developed. So they grafted branches of that tree onto other pines, and then they developed from seeds from that tree. And all those trees came from this one tree. So yes, you can take branches from one tree and move it to another. You can replace foliage. I have seen trees where you have both types of foliage on it. It looks really funny. Sometimes you'll see, small leaves and big leaves on the same tree where somebody grafted some of the leaves, some of the branches from a different species that developed slightly differently. So yeah, all this is possible.
All right, cheers, Rusty. I won't take up any more time. Richard Hughes.
Okay, sorry, I was having trouble unmuting. Good evening, Rusty.
Hey, Richard.
My question is about where to keep bonsai. In general, would you recommend they be kept outside or inside? I mean, I suppose it depends on where you are in the world, but I'm in the south of England, and the climate here is generally quite mild.
That's a very good question with a very simple answer. It depends on the species.
Okay.
So, and depending on the species, you have to do what the species wants. So I have pines, maples, stewardias, birch, some junipers, silverberry, elaeagnus. All of them have to stay outside. If I bring them inside for maybe a week, they will die.
Okay.
The air is just too dry, and they need to go dormant in the winter, so they have to freeze. The one that I would have is the only tropical bonsai that I have, and that's bougainvillea. It cannot freeze; it will die. Even though there are people in Florida who grow bougainvillea, and I've seen pictures of them covered in ice. But if they freeze for a prolonged period of time, they will die. So you just need to learn about this particular species and what it requires. Okay. So one of the few species I cannot grow in Atlanta because it's so warm is larch. It's too warm for larch. It does not go into deep freeze here for enough time for larch to survive.
Okay.
And maybe if I had a freezer that I can keep it in, maybe I would be able to get around it. But the easiest thing to figure out is to see what grows well as garden trees in your area.
Okay, so as a rule of thumb, if an ordinary tree grows okay in the garden, then a miniature tree should be fine.
Absolutely. And again, if you remember the size of that red pine that came from the Imperial Garden, it's over 5 feet tall. So I think of them as just regular trees.
Yeah.
They just grow in a confined environment.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers, Richard. Andy Tuckwell again.
Yeah. Maybe this might sound a slightly odd question, but is there a special Japanese term for the sort of bonsai where you train the trunk into a particular shape? I'll tell you why I ask as well. If you want to flip,
in the way all of them you're training a trunk into a particular shape.
Could you flip back in your presentation to, I think, probably about the third tree of your own that you showed us, probably a white pine?
1 second. Let's see. This is that.
Yeah.
The third one. This one?
No. Further off. Yeah. Next one. Next one. Next one. That one. Go back one.
Yeah, that's a red pine.
You've got an animal there. You've got a deer or a horse or something with its back legs in the pot. Its front legs holding the bottom left branch, and its head further up. Can you see it?
I don't, but I'm sure you do.
Could almost be a zebra with stripes along its back.
Andy,
Yeah,
I see it as well, but I might not be on the same drugs you are.
Okay, so I see. Yeah, I see it now.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Might be a reindeer with those antlers.
Yeah.
So so I don't know that there is a name for it. I think that was the question, right? Is there a term where you train a trunk to resemble a particular animal or something? So
I think you did a great job on that one anyway.
I don't know the answer, but I often trees will have names, particularly important trees will be given names like a rising dragon, or often you'll see it, particularly in Japan, but it's not a style of trees, right? It's a particular tree that's important. Some of the trees in Japan are given a designation known as the important cultural artifact, and they get a little dog tag that hangs on the branch, and those are usually not allowed to leave Japan, so they cannot be sold unless there's an agreement from the government. But I don't know if there's a name for that style. If you just Google the styles of bonsai, you'll see usually it has to do with how many trees you have and how much it leans one direction or the other.
Right.
Now
nice
every time
tree,
I
that
look
one.
at this tree, I'll see the zebra. I see the eye too.
It's really been caught in the wild and turned into a tree, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rusty, that is what you call perfect photography.
Yeah.
You've positioned it in the perfect angle to take that picture.
I actually didn't take this picture. I stole it from the internet.
We'll take the credit at least.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
I have to say that working on this tree has been one of the most amazing experiences of my life. If you think about, let's say you're into drawing pictures and you go into a museum and they say, oh yeah, come back, we're going to be... This is what happened to me, and
Wow.
I cannot take any credit for it, but very grateful.
All right, Rusty. Cheers, Andy, again. I think we'll get 3 questions in now, and that will be the end. Anton?
Hi. Fantastic talk, Rusty. I I was just wondering, are there any fruit trees trained or whatever you call it as bonsai, and are they blooming and carrying fruit, if so?
Yes. So remember I mentioned that the nursery where I studied in Japan, ICN, started from a gentleman planting 1,000 seeds of flower and apricot. This year, I actually got a bunch of pits from an apricot tree, flower and apricot tree here. And ume is one of the top species in bonsai because they bloom in February, usually in the winter. And also bear fruit. So fruiting trees, big part of bonsai.
Okay.
I don't have any, but yeah, crab apples are very popular.
Yeah.
Because fruit is proportional to the size of the trunk. Yeah. Quince, sometimes you'll see quince with the fruit on it. Yeah, quince, not just that, not only quince are big relative to the trunk, but they also grow upside down like pineapple.
Yeah.
They stick up, but sometimes you'll see that in shows as well. Often fruiting trees will be displayed either in the spring with flowers or in the late fall with fruit.
Okay. Nice.
And leaves often will be eliminated so that you can see the fruit and you can see. In fact, in deciduous trees, most deciduous trees are displayed without leaves, so you can see the structure of the tree. With leaves, most of the time is just one big green helmet and a little bit of trunk at the bottom. Yeah, no, but fruiting trees are a big part of bonsai. I'm thinking about, oh yeah, I have Farthesia, which is not a tree but a shrub, but it has beautiful yellow flower, and that's probably, and bougainvillea is flowering as well. But yeah, no, fruiting trees, cherries, big part of bonsai as well. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
Sure.
I'm in the middle of harvesting my apricots in the moment. So.
Well, so again, if you can grow a tree, you probably can grow it in a container and then it becomes a bonsai. So seeds and propagate.
I'm not looking for another rabbit hole to go down to.
Every day.
Cheers.
Thanks, Anton. It appears we're on to the last question now, as Anton already asked Chester's question. So, Matthias.
Yes, thank you very much. So this might be a slightly facetious question, but it's not meant to be disrespectful.
Inconceivable.
Exactly. I belong to a different subgroup of humanity, the banjo players, at whom a lot of fun is poked both externally and internally. What kind of fun does bonsaiists poke at each other and themselves? So how do you make fun of yourselves?
I think I've given you plenty of material. How about shipping stones across the ocean or importing dirt?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah, we do things that many other humans would consider strange.
Yes, I was talking about playing the banjo.
Yeah, yeah, much more than playing the banjo.
Yes.
But
no,
some people
not how do others laugh at you, but how do you laugh at yourselves?
We don't. We take it very seriously.
I see. Okay, fair enough. Yeah, as I said, a facetious question, but it is not meant to be.
You know, I'm really gonna have to think about how do we.
Because I mean, it must be, you know, when you're kicking back after a long day, replanting root balls, you must be making jokes about yourselves and your weird habits and what went right and what went wrong. And
I do love how Rusty's having to think so hard about this. That really does mean there is
a blank here.
Do you think this is 5 millimeters?
So let me answer this question slightly differently, if I may.
Yes, of course.
So one of my best memories from working in Japan is repotting time. It's really heavy work. You have a limited window of time, and professionals have many clients. You go and work at their places, and you work from morning till night for weeks and weeks and weeks, and hopefully have time for your own nursery to take care of. The conversations around dinner time with plenty of alcohol, often about how well those trees are doing, how far they've come on, some stories. This is being recorded, so I don't know if I should be sharing those stories. But one of the stories that I learned was about a gentleman who bought a tree for his client for $60,000. And within weeks, that tree was not doing well and started losing leaves. And as this happens, the professional starts losing hair. He actually wakes up in the morning and there are clumps of hair on the pillow. Now, I never knew that professional had any hair. I've always known him as bald as Anton. But yeah, but that was one of those stories that was told to me with shoju and Korean barbecue after a day of repotting.
Yep, I think you just answered my question beautifully. Thank you, Rusty.
Thank you.
All right, I think now's the time that we all raise our glasses or bottles to, or bench beverages rather, to Rusty and to the bench. Cheers, Rusty.
Rusty.
Thank you.
Cheers, Rusty.